You think they're hurting you. You believe the pain comes from their words, their actions, their betrayal. You've built an entire mythology around your suffering, pointing fingers at lovers who left, friends who disappointed, strangers who wronged you. You carry these wounds like sacred relics, polishing them daily with your attention, your resentment, your endless replaying of how things should have been different. But here's the truth that will shatter your comfortable victimhood. They are not hurting you. You are hurting yourself. Every moment of agony you feel is not their doing. It's your resistance to what simply is. You are the author of your own torment, the architect of your own prison. And you've been blaming the weather for the walls you built around yourself. The pain you feel is not their invasion. It's your refusal to let reality be real. Look at how you hold on to hurt, how you nurse it, feed it, give it a home in your chest, how you return to it like a tongue to a sore tooth, pressing against the tender spot again and again. This is not their cruelty visiting you. This is your own mind choosing suffering over acceptance, choosing the familiar ache of resistance over the unknown territory of letting go. You've become addicted to the story of your own victimhood. It gives you identity, purpose, a reason to feel special in your suffering. But this story is a cage and you hold the key. The moment you stop resisting what happened, what they did, what they said, that moment, the pain dissolves like salt in water. Not because the facts change, but because your relationship to the facts transforms completely. They were never your enemy. Your resistance was. From the moment you drew breath, you were taught to expect the world to conform to your desires. Your parents soothed every cry. Your teachers promised fairness. Your culture whispered lies about justice and predictability. You learned that when you wanted something, tears or tantrums or good behavior could make it happen. You learned to demand that people behave according to your script. You learned to resist any reality that didn't match your expectations. When someone acts selfishly, you resist. When life brings loss, you resist. When change arrives uninvited, you resist. This resistance, this constant pushing against what is, has become your identity. You call it having standards. You call it self-respect. You call it knowing your worth. But look deeper. What you call virtue is actually a desperate attempt to control a universe that was never meant to be controlled. Your pain comes not from what happens to you, but from your insistence that it should be different. You've been fighting reality your entire life, and wondering why reality always wins. Consider how much energy you spend each day in resistance. How much mental bandwidth goes to replaying conversations that didn't go your way, imagining different outcomes, rehearsing what you should have said. How much of your life force gets drained by this constant inner argument with what already happened. You resist your partner's mood. You resist your boss's decisions. You resist the weather, the traffic, the way your coffee tastes this morning. You resist aging, change, the natural cycles of gain and loss that govern all existence. This resistance feels so normal, so justified, that you don't even recognize it as a choice. It feels like the only reasonable response to a world that doesn't obey your preferences. But this normalcy is the very trap that keeps you suffering. You were conditioned to believe that resistance equals self-respect, that accepting unpleasant realities equals weakness. You were taught that fighting back against unwanted circumstances proves your strength, your worth, your refusal to be a doormat. But what if the opposite were true? What if your resistance is the most powerless position of all? What if acceptance is the ultimate expression of inner strength? Every time you resist, you give your power away to whatever you're resisting. You make external circumstances the dictator of your inner state. You become a puppet dancing to strings held by people and situations outside your control. The ancient Taoists understood what you've forgotten, that resistance to the natural flow of existence is the root of all human suffering. When water encounters a rock, it doesn't resist, it flows around, over, through. It doesn't demand the rock be elsewhere. It doesn't waste energy fighting what's already there. Alan Watts spoke of this fundamental delusion, the ego's belief that it can stand separate from the river of existence and judge its currents. You imagine yourself as outside the dance of life, critiquing the choreography instead of moving with the music. But you are not separate from what is happening to you. You are part of the happening itself. The betrayal, the loss, the disappointment. These are not external events attacking an innocent you. They are movements in the same field of consciousness that you call yourself. To resist them is to resist your own nature, to fight against the very ground of your being. This is why your resistance feels like tearing yourself apart from the inside, because that's exactly what it is. Consider the ocean. When a storm comes, the ocean doesn't resist the wind. It rises and falls with the forces moving through it, yet it remains essentially itself. Vast, deep, unperturbed at its core. The waves on the surface may be wild, but the depths remain calm. You are like that, ocean. The storms of life, the difficult people, the challenging circumstances, the losses and betrayals, these are surface weather. They cannot touch your essential nature unless you give them the power to do so through resistance. But instead of being the ocean, you've identified yourself as the waves. You think you are the storm on the surface instead of the vast stillness beneath. You think you are the temporary weather patterns instead of the infinite space in which all weather arises and passes away. Watts taught that this identification with the surface waves, this mistaking yourself for the temporary phenomena that move through awareness, is the source of all psychological suffering. You suffer not because difficult things happen, but because you've forgotten what you really are. What you really are cannot be hurt. What you really are cannot be diminished by anyone's actions or words. What you really are is the space in which all experiences arise, the witness, the awareness, the unchanging background against which all change occurs. When you remember this, resistance becomes impossible. How can the sky resist the clouds that pass through it? How can space resist the objects that appear within it? You are not what happens to you. You are what remains aware of what happens to you. There is another way to live, a way that flows like water, yields like grass in the wind, accepts like the earth accepts rain, a way that transforms every obstacle into an opportunity for grace. This new virtue is not passive submission, it's active participation in reality as it unfolds. When someone leaves you, instead of resisting their departure, you let them go, completely. You honor their choice, their journey, their right to follow their own path. You release them not from weakness, but from the strength that comes from knowing your worth doesn't depend on their presence. When betrayal comes, instead of clinging to how things should be, you release your grip entirely. You stop demanding that people be different than they are. You stop expecting consistency from beings who are in constant flux, growth, change. This is not weakness. This is the supreme strength of alignment with what is. The person who accepts completely becomes invulnerable to suffering, not because nothing difficult happens to them, but because they've stopped creating additional pain through resistance. They move through loss like wind through leaves, touching everything, holding nothing. When you stop demanding that reality, conform to your preferences, something miraculous happens. You discover that reality, exactly as it is, contains everything you need. The very experiences you were resisting become your teachers. The people you were blaming become instruments of your awakening. You realize that your resistance was the only thing standing between you and peace. Imagine what your life would look like if you stopped fighting what's already here. If you stopped wasting energy trying to change the past, control the future, or modify other people's behavior to suit your comfort. Imagine the freedom of accepting your partner exactly as they are, moody mornings and all. The relief of accepting your job situation without the constant mental complaining. The peace of accepting your body, your circumstances, your history, without the endless inner commentary about how things should be different. This doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting abuse. True acceptance often requires action, but action that comes from clarity and strength rather than resistance and reactivity. When you stop fighting what is, you can see what needs to be done with crystalline clarity. The person who truly accepts can leave a toxic relationship without hatred. They can set boundaries without resentment. They can say no without making others wrong. They can protect themselves without becoming an enemy to what they're protecting themselves from. This is the virtue of flowing with life while maintaining your essential integrity. Like a tree that bends with the wind but doesn't break, you learn to yield without compromising your core values. You discover that true strength isn't about being immovable, it's about being so flexible that nothing can break you. But even this acceptance must not become a new prison. Even this wisdom must be held lightly, worn like a loose garment that can be removed when the season changes. The moment you turn non-resistance into a philosophy, into something you practice or achieve, you've created another form of resistance to your own resistance. You start judging yourself for having preferences, for feeling disappointed, for having human reactions to human experiences. There will be times when you forget, times when you catch yourself fighting reality again, demanding that people behave differently, that circumstances align with your wishes. This too is part of what is. This too deserves acceptance. Accept even your inability to accept. Flow even with your tendency to resist the flow. In the deepest silence, you discover that there's no you separate from what's happening to resist or accept anything. There's just the happening itself, the seamless unfolding of life expressing itself through every form, every feeling, every moment of apparent separation, even your pain, even your resistance, even your struggle to let go. All of this is the dance of existence playing with itself. All of this is consciousness exploring its own nature through the countless forms it takes. In this silence, beyond all concepts of resistance and acceptance, you find the source that needs nothing from anyone, that cannot be hurt by anyone, that is already whole. This silence is not empty. It's pregnant with infinite possibility. It's not dead. It's vibrantly alive. It's not separate from life. It's life itself, aware of its own aliveness. From this silence, you begin to see that even your most cherished spiritual insights must eventually be released. Even your hard-won wisdom must be allowed to dissolve back into the mystery from which it arose. The cup must be emptied to be filled again. The self must die daily to be reborn fresh in each moment. The expert must return to beginner's mind to keep learning. This is the ultimate teaching, that all teachings must eventually be forgotten, that all methods must eventually be transcended, that all insights must eventually be released back into the vast unknowing from which they emerged. In this not knowing, in this sacred emptiness, you find the peace that passes understanding, not the peace that comes from getting what you want, but the peace that remains when wanting itself dissolves into being. Stop waiting for them to change so you can be at peace. Stop expecting life to apologize for being itself. Stop demanding that the universe rearrange itself to match your preferences. Right now, in this moment, you can choose to drop the rope you've been pulling in this tug of war with reality. You can choose to let what is simply be what it is. You can choose to stop being the enemy of your own experience. This choice is always available. In every moment of resistance, in every surge of resentment, in every impulse to fight what's already here, you can pause, breathe, and choose differently. You can choose to be curious instead of resistant. You can choose to wonder what this experience might teach you instead of demanding that it be different. You can choose to find the gift hidden in what appears to be unwanted. If these words have touched something real in you, if they've awakened a recognition of the futility of fighting what is, write this in the comments. I release my demand that reality be different. Let this be your declaration of independence from the prison of resistance. Let this be your commitment to dancing with life instead of wrestling it to the ground. Your suffering has been optional all along. Not because nothing difficult happens, but because your resistance to what happens is a choice you make in every moment. Choose differently. Choose to be the space in which all experiences arise and pass away. Choose to be the awareness that remains untouched by whatever moves through it. Choose to be the ocean that allows all waves without being disturbed by any of them. The river of existence flows whether you fight it or join it. But only when you stop fighting do you discover that you were always the river itself. You were never separate from the flow you were trying to resist. You were never the victim of forces outside yourself. You were always the very life force expressing itself through this temporary form you call your life. Watch the next video to explore how this acceptance transforms not just your pain, but your entire relationship with life itself. Discover how the end of resistance becomes the beginning of authentic power. Learn how letting go becomes the ultimate form of strength. The journey from resistance to flow is the journey from suffering to freedom, from separation to unity, from fighting life to being life itself. The current was never your enemy. It was always carrying you home to the truth of what you are beneath all the stories, all the resistance, all the demands that reality be different. You are already what you're seeking. The peace you want exists in the space between your thoughts. The love you crave flows from the source that you are. The strength you need emerges when you stop fighting your own nature. Come home to yourself. Come home to what is. Come home to the present moment that asks nothing from you except your presence. This is the only revolution that matters. The revolution from resistance to acceptance, from fighting to flowing, from suffering to peace.